Hello.
Whoa, what an igniting appearance.
How electric.
How electric.
This is Okanagan Legends and Hauntings, your podcast for all things spooky and unexplainable in the region. And today I've got with me Georgia.
Hello.
Who's blending into her chair.
I'm one with the chair. I didn't realize how tan I was.
Yeah, and with the camo, you are fully engulfed by the chair.
Let me know if you guys can find me this episode.
So, Georgia, you know, when you've grown up somewhere, everything about it becomes so familiar.
Yeah.
Like, you can plot the map of the town in your mind. You know every little crevice and corner, and you've got memories associated with everything. And it's not often that you come across something new to learn about the place that you're from.
Yeah.
That's definitely the case for me with Kelowna.
Yeah.
And with the topic of today's episode.
I'm intrigued.
So the topic today is Kelowna's Chinatown.
Oh, wow.
So have you heard about the fact that Kelowna at one point had a Chinatown?
No, not at all. That's one of the first things that I thought when I moved here, because like in Vancouver we have a Chinatown and like a Koreatown, and they're like pretty prominent. Even in like Victoria, there's a huge Chinatown, where you can buy food and just delicious items. And there's a big cultural center. And then when we moved here, it was strange to me.
No Chinatown to be found.
Yeah, because it's downtown, so it's like you would think that there would be, I don't know, more cultural sectors of downtown.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That brings up a good point where, for me, when I learned that Kelowna had a Chinatown, which admittedly was very recently, like maybe 5 years ago, regrettably to admit.
Whoa.
The only frame of reference I had for what Chinatown was what I saw in Vancouver and Victoria,
Right.
like the styles of architecture,
Yeah.
the types of stores that were there. So when I did eventually learn that at one point Kelowna did have a Chinatown, I was really interested to figure out what that meant, why it was gone, what it looked like, what the story was. So when I also uncovered that there might be some spooky accounts associated with the area, I thought that was a great topic for the podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad that I did undertake to study about this, because my preconceptions about it, a lot of them were incorrect, and I got to learn a lot about my community here.
Nice.
So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce you to Kelowna's historic Chinatown.
Let's get into it. You just had that there.
Of
Waiting.
course, I'm always prepared. So,
I'm not.
Yeah, where's yours?
You're teaching me.
So to discuss Kelowna's Chinatown, we have to talk about the history of the Chinese people in British Columbia.
Okay.
So the first recorded presence of Chinese immigrants in BC was in 1788.
Whoa.
But notably, there was a really large influx of Chinese immigrants due to the Fraser Gold Rush. Gold was found in the Fraser River in 1858.
Huge.
The Gold Rush brought over people from all corners of the globe, including from China.
Cool.
Many people immigrated to earn some money with the promise of gold in order to send it back home. Other than mining, many Chinese people did work such as farming, cooking, opening businesses. But unfortunately, Chinese workers were not treated equally in the slightest in Canada.
Yeah, we sort of saw a little bit of that with the SS Sigamoose.
Right.
Yeah.
With reference to like the Chinese cook who worked on.
Yeah.
Chinese cooks that worked on the ship.
Yeah, they weren't allowed above a certain level because they didn't want them to be seen by boat users.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
Yeah.
those type of attitudes were very prominent throughout history. Yeah, big thumbs down.
Boo.
The Chinese immigrants that came here were up against the predominant racist and xenophobic attitudes of the time. For example, compared to their white counterparts, Chinese workers were paid like half the amount
Oh my gosh.
for the same work
Yeah.
or worse work.
That's ridiculous.
They were often made to live in poor conditions, which led to illness, disease that cost Chinese people hundreds of lives in Canada. And like I said, they're often made to work more dangerous jobs than white people. Notably, I'm thinking about the Chinese contribution to the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway, which is the railway that goes all the way across the country. Construction of the railway occurred in the 1880s. And it's estimated that 3/4 of the workers of the CPR were of Chinese descent, and they were often tasked with jobs like blasting through mountains, and these types of tasks had so much more risk inherent in them, and it's estimated that between 600 to 4,000 Chinese workers lost their lives while building the CPR.
That's a substantial loss.
Absolutely.
Like, that is, like, not right.
And to think about what the population of the country was back then.
Yeah.
To lose that many lives on one job.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like, if you think to the upward end of that, that's a stadium full of people.
Yeah, it's true.
That just gone.
It's horrible.
Ridiculous.
So, in addition to these workplace atrocities taking place, there was an onslaught of legislation that was explicitly designed to exclude and disadvantage Chinese people in Canada and discourage immigration very specifically from China. For example, in 1872, the Qualification and Registration of Voters Act in BC disqualified Chinese people from voting in provincial elections. Just like ixnayed.
Stupid.
Yes. And then in 1885, the Chinese Immigration Act was introduced, and along with it came the infamous head tax. Have you heard of this?
I haven't heard of that.
So this was a fee applied to each Chinese person who wanted to come to Canada, with very few exceptions. So each person on their way into Canada had to pay $50 to do so.
Which wasn't a small amount back then.
No.
That's I wonder what the...
Oh, well, wait.
Okay,
Hold on.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay, I forgive you.
I was excited.
So that was in 1885 when
Yeah.
that act was introduced. And then in 1900, the head tax went up to $100.
Whoa.
And then again in 1903 increased to $500 per person.
Whoa.
So to give it a bit of a frame of reference, at the time, the average annual salary of a Chinese worker in Canada was $400.
So you'd have to work for a year and a bit
Yes.
to come to Canada.
Yes.
Or to pay.
Well, the situation that a lot of people found themselves in was that, like a husband would come to Canada from China and start working, wanting to build a life, and eventually bring their wife and kids over.
Right.
But with the introduction of the head tax, that became very difficult, if not impossible, for a lot of people. So if you account for inflation, that $500 in 1903 represents about $18,000 today.
Whoa.
Like, we can't even...
That's actually insane.
Yeah, we can't even comprehend that kind of legislation being pushed through
Now.
government today. But
Well,
this was not that long ago that this was in place.
And I can see that being really sucky for a family, because obviously the dads probably come over, work their booties off in Canada to try to get their wife and their kids over, and then, I mean, you're given the most dangerous jobs, you're in a bad way, so, like, the chances of then being able to pay for your wife and your child Like, that's rough.
And that was explicit and by design by the government.
That's crazy.
So to add insult to injury, in 1910, a $200 landing tax was imposed on all Asian immigrants. So that means that Chinese immigrants needed to pay $700 total to enter Canada.
That is so dumb.
And like I said, the federal government was not subtle in its
Yeah.
motives for restricting Chinese immigration. And the head tax was not restricting as much immigration as they would have liked.
Yeah.
In fact, in 1923, the federal government passed the very aptly named Chinese Exclusion Act. Just the name of it is horrible.
That's like awful.
Yes.
That's,
To put it lightly, yes.
what the heck, 1900s Canada?
I know. This act effectively banned Chinese immigration outright. So the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1947, like over 20 years later.
Like, they took 20 years to be like, maybe let's not do this.
And it said that during the time that the act was active, only 15 Chinese immigrants made it into Canada.
That's so crazy.
That is
to me.
how restrictive the act was.
That's insane. For 20 years, only 15 people. That's crazy.
So once the act was repealed, it was only then that Chinese people were allowed to vote. They were allowed to take on a professional career. And it wasn't until 1967 that all aspects of the Chinese Exclusion Act were finally and fully eradicated from legislation. So, to bring it back locally to Kelowna's Chinatown.
Yeah.
Post completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway, post Gold Rush, many Chinese people began settling in the Kelowna area. Often they were taking up jobs in agriculture, building businesses, trying to settle down. And in 1892, construction started on Chinatown. For a frame of reference, Kelowna was incorporated in 1905. So the Chinese community predates the city of Kelowna.
That's crazy.
Chinatown was located downtown from Abbott Street to Water Street and Leon Avenue to Harvey Avenue. So
Okay.
it's sort of like 2 blocks.
2 blocks. Yeah.
Its buildings were commonly made of wood or brick, as there used to be a brick factory in Kelowna. So
No
there
way.
wasn't like the pagodas and the type of architecture that you might think
Yeah.
of when you think of like Vancouver's Chinatown or Victoria's Chinatown.
Yeah.
There were a variety of businesses there, such as a general store, some restaurants, a laundry, and a shoe repair store, as well as residences as well. At Chinatown's height, it's estimated that 10 to 15% of Kelowna's population was Chinese,
Whoa.
and largely Chinese men.
Okay.
In 1930, there were about 400 to 500 people living in Chinatown.
That's quite a few people in like 2 blocks.
Yeah, especially when you think it's not like everyone's crammed into a high-rise building like
Yeah.
they are today. That's
Yeah.
in a couple blocks, 500 people. That's
substantial.
a lively neighborhood.
That is a very lively neighborhood. That's a lot of people.
Yes. So there was certainly a period of growth in Chinatown.
Yeah. For sure.
However, there was a sharp decline after 1930. With the context of all the discriminatory legislation that I described, you can imagine why.
Yeah.
There were a lot of Chinese men who came to work in BC for the gold rush, for the CPR, and for a promise of a new life, who intended to bring their families over to Canada once they were more established. But with the head tax and the Chinese Exclusion Act, it became increasingly difficult and then impossible to do that. So there were a lot of married men living in Chinatown without their families, and some of them lived out the rest of their days there alone.
That's super sad.
Yeah, it must have been really lonely.
Yeah. Like, you sort of come to Canada for a better life, and then you're stuck here without your family. That's super depressing.
And the Chinese community contributed so much to Kelowna. They were pivotal in the agricultural sector, and of course, the contributions to the Canadian Pacific Railway, just creating the community of Kelowna as we know it.
Well, they were here longer than the city was, so
Yeah.
I would be surprised if that wasn't even the start of the community.
Absolutely.
So,
It said that at one point there was only one woman living in Chinatown who raised 11 children
whoa,
by making and selling tofu.
I love that.
So a very hardworking
Go
community.
her.
Absolutely. As work kind of dried up, a lot of people from Chinatown moved to like Vancouver or like moved away to find more work. And by the 1940s, Chinatown was almost completely gone.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, so people were still living there, but the land was purchased in 1972 by a developer, and essentially everything was demolished.
What's new?
What's new?
Developers, man,
I know.
taking all the cool buildings away.
Yes. So some artifacts were retrieved and are now on display at the Okanagan Heritage Museum.
Oh, whoa, no wait.
Yeah.
That's sweet.
Lots to learn there.
Go to museums.
Yes, again.
We say this every
that is the thesis statement of our podcast. Go to museums.
They're awesome.
Yes. Today, the area where Chinatown once stood is right near City Park, notably housing a new high-rise development.
Yes.
Well, if you think about it, that area was developed, and then there were buildings there that have since been developed.
That's so true. You could fit 500 people into the one high-rise building.
Yeah, you could fit more than that.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's actually wild.
So, in 2014, the BC government issued a formal apology for the racist legislation and mistreatment of the Chinese community. Yes. Much long overdue.
Yes, very overdue.
This apology covered over, get ready to have your mind blown, 100 pieces of British Columbian legislation passed throughout the 18 and 1900s that discriminated against the Chinese community. Over 100
That's a lot.
were in effect throughout those years.
Insane.
How horrible.
And probably like fine print, like
Not even. Some of these laws that were put in place were explicitly racist against Chinese people.
it's hard to think about that. You know? I'm gonna say it. Like racists are bad.
Say it louder.
Racists are bad.
Of course.
But just like in this day and age, I mean, we're not perfect even now. There's still a lot of racist things going on today.
yes.
But to think of like overtly racist legislation passing today,
It's hard to
That's-
fathom.
yeah.
So, to put it briefly and lightly, the road to getting an apology and any restitution was a long one.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of hard work put in by members of the Chinese community to get that to happen. It was very long overdue.
Yeah.
To touch on a local group doing some interesting work, the OCCA Communities Association is a nonprofit that provides resources and services to multicultural communities across the central Okanagan. Their resources and time speaking with me were important for sending me in the right direction for this episode. So thank you for that. So speaking of them, in 2017, the OCCA were able to unveil a sign in City Park overlooking where Chinatown once stood. It's a really beautifully designed sign that details the story and the history of the Chinese pioneers in Kelowna. If you're ever taking a walk through City Park, I really encourage you to stop and read it. There's a great amount of information on both sides, and it's just a beautiful sign. I'm glad it's there. After the physical Chinatown has been torn down, a lot of time has passed since then, and so few people really know about it. For example, me until about 5 years ago, Georgia until now.
To today, I didn't even know.
It's so important to have this signage and this information available so that we never forget this important part of Kelowna's history.
Yeah. Sort of goes back into what I say almost every single episode of, hey, let's keep important historical things. They're really cool and inform people.
Again, something interesting to see at the Okanagan Heritage Museum, they have the facade of one of the buildings in Chinatown
Oh,
kind
cool.
of reconstructed.
Cool.
Yeah,
I
so
like that.
glad those types of things are still on display.
Yeah.
To talk a little bit about the haunted accounts associated with the historic Chinatown. So I specifically left out a crucial part of the Kelowna Chinatown history because it's inextricably tied to the haunted story I want to share.
She lied to us.
I didn't lie. I withheld information.
Okay, let's hear it. I'm ready.
So this has to do with the Spanish influenza epidemic of 1918.
Whoa.
Yeah, so we know all about pandemics and restrictions. Been there, done that.
I'm having flashbacks.
But if you can imagine a world over 100 years ago where social distancing and quarantine protocols were being put into place, where vaccines weren't being developed at the rate they are or can be today, yikes.
Pretty bad.
Yes.
Everybody's all together and sneezing and coughing.
Yeah, so the second wave of the Spanish flu really took a toll worldwide. There were many, many deaths. There weren't a ton of casualties in Kelowna, except in Chinatown. At one point, Chinatown was put on lockdown, complete quarantine, no one in or out. And because of the legislation at the time, Chinese people weren't being admitted to the hospital that other people were going to. So they had like a makeshift hospital where they would treat sick people. And around this time, a rumor began to fly. People started claiming to see a timid white boy around the age of 6. This boy would be walking around barefoot in the night, kind of in the periphery around like outbuildings, never coming inside. Rumor had it that anyone who saw this boy would soon contract the flu and die.
Oh!
There were never reports of white people seeing this figure. And in fact, unsurprisingly, the local newspaper covered this rumor in a very sarcastic tone.
Of course.
However, historians are hard-pressed to find more than one person not of Chinese descent that died of the Spanish flu in this area. And 17 residents of Chinatown ended up dying of the Spanish flu. Which, again, when you think about the amounts of people that were living in the area, that is a huge hit.
That's it. Yeah, it's a huge hit. And especially they couldn't go to the hospital or anything. They're just trying to figure it out
Just
by
sick,
themselves. Like
horrible. So that's a pretty spooky prospect.
Yeah.
To be so worried about this new disease, maybe not having access to the types of care that other people in the town were.
Yeah.
That other people in the town had.
Yeah.
And then having the idea that there may be this spirit around that would evidently signal an incoming plague.
Yeah, that's freaky.
It's haunting.
I would be scared.
There are other generic accounts at the historic site of Chinatown. Some people report feeling not alone.
The classic.
Yes.
I'm not alone.
Like someone's watching, or that like an eerie silence has sort of fallen.
Yeah.
Some people have reported hearing faint children's laughter or seeing glimpses of small figures or apparitions in the area. I've also heard tell at various points along the Canadian Pacific Railway where people report paranormal activity related to the deaths of the Chinese workers that took place there. The stories I've heard are from areas that would really push the boundaries of what Okanagan legends and hauntings can really touch on. I know we've pushed the limits before.
We're trying not to.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my foot down because they are a bit further out than I think we should talk about.
Yeah,
but
that's fair.
I thought it was worth bringing up because there's obviously a lot of residual pain arising from the maltreatment of the Chinese community in British Columbia.
Yeah.
And that's actually all I have to share with you today.
Whoa.
I've spoken with a few people in the community who informed me they are not aware of any stories of paranormal activity arising from Chinatown. So do with that information what you will.
Yeah.
And I think that, do you want to say something?
I've heard tell of Kelowna being too young to be super haunted or have too many paranormal things going on because it's a pretty young city compared to like Vancouver and stuff because they're on a port. So, you know, obviously those were settled in first. So it kind of makes sense that there might not be as many, but still very freaky to have the stories that we have of it anyway. Well, if I was like downtown and it was the middle of the night and I heard a tiny child laugh, and in the peripheral of my eye,
Mm-hmm.
I saw this figure move by, I think I might be a little freaked out. So
Absolutely.
it might be young, and we don't have that many stories, but that's still unexplained.
And yeah, even though this isn't the spookiest of stories that we've discussed, and like you say, Kelowna is not known for having many haunted accounts,
Yeah,
I still really wanted to talk about it.
absolutely.
I think it's a good reminder for those of us out there seeking out paranormal content that so many times when there are reports of haunted activity, the reason behind it or the story behind it is very sad.
Yeah.
And sometimes it goes into territory that's hard to discuss.
Yeah. And that's also what I'm sort of proud of us for doing here, is we're not shying away from the bad history. Every place has bad history, but it's important to talk about these sort of things to bring a conversation. And I think in turn of us talking about it, you know, I am originally from South Africa, so coming here and learning about, you know, hard history here in this place that was sort of a saving grace for us, is a hard thing to go through, because as a kid you're like, oh my gosh, Canada's so safe and it's so great, and you know, I'm not in the spot that I was before, but you know, you do learn things, and it is a bit disappointing, and you are wishing as an adult that, you know, they handled things differently. But had we not had these tough conversations in school, and, you know, in the podcast, I mean, even people watching might not have known about these things, or felt that they couldn't open a conversation about it, were nervous about it. But it's important to open the conversation with people. Part of these communities that have been discriminated with, and just know that you're a safe person to be around. I think that's a huge, just letting them know that you don't think that way is not that hard, and I think it's a bare minimum to make people feel safe and welcome, especially for us as people who are not the original people of the land.
Yeah.
We've done some damage, and we need to fix that. So
Yeah, and of course, it also goes without saying that we're just two kind of goofs doing a podcast, and it's so important to hear the stories from the community themselves.
Yeah.
So again, we always want to encourage you to seek out the people in your community who can share these stories firsthand.
yeah, definitely. And maybe you're in a city that doesn't have a Chinatown. Maybe you want to look into why. You know, see if you had one and what happened to it, and then maybe go visit the spot that it was, or, you know, it's just kind of neat and good to understand the history.
Yeah. So this isn't a sensational, scary story where there's a building you can go and visit and try to elicit a paranormal response.
Yeah.
This is a story that has been passed down in our community, arising from a very real tragedy that took place.
Yeah.
It deals with a really ugly part of British Columbian history that officially mistreated an entire people group. So yes, Kelowna has this spooky story. It's not the wildest, it's not the most widely known, but it is closely tied to our city's history, and I think it's worth knowing and sharing, whether
Absolutely.
you believe the area is haunted or not.
Yeah.
These stories, too, are a part of the intrigue of doing paranormal research, and sometimes learning the history component of a paranormal account is just as important and interesting as the paranormal account itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Closing thoughts?
Official closing thoughts: be kind to one another.
Agreed.
There's a lot of trauma that has been passed down from generation to generation. You don't know what people are going through, so just be kind.
Amen.
From the two goofs doing a little podcast in George's parents' basement.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
Okay, well, thank you very much for tuning into this episode of Okanagan Legends and Hauntings. Please tune in next time for another story of something spooky and unexplainable. Will we explain it?
I don't know if we can.
I don't think it's explainable.
I don't think it is. Aren't you guys just dying to know what it
Does
is?
that make you want to watch the next episode?
You'll have to find out. Because
Right?
we can't explain it.
No.
Bye.